Someone has to vacuum the second that I start this. Hello, spooky friends, and happy Spooktober. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about one place that I really truly would love to go visit, and is said to be very haunted. It's the Tower of London. So the Tower of London, also officially known as Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, is a historic castle on the River Thames in central London. It lies within a London borough of Tower Hamlets. Throughout history, the tower has been adapted and developed to help defend the nation. It was founded towards the end of 1066 as part of the Norman conquest of England. Of course, since its founding, the tower has been home to many grisly deaths, and it has more than its share of ghastly happenings. But where did it all come from? Well, visitors to the tower have said that they've either experienced a repugnant smell or a ghostly figure altogether, and the stories never seem to end. There are many inexplicable happenings at the Tower of London. This tower has seen many things in its 900 plus years of existence. When William the Conqueror, fresh from victory, was looking to quell rebellion upon his return, he built a mighty stone tower at the center of London, which became a fortress. In around the 1070s it was completed. Defeated Londoners looked up in awe, and also a little bit of terror. He intended to defeat their minds and hearts with the domination of the London skyline. It was his way of flexing his royal power, but it was like nothing that England had ever seen before. So its effects were palpable to all of those in that area that would look up and see this massive tower. Who would go against that? So now, nearly 1,000 years later, it has the capacity still to terrify and fascinate. So the tower took around 20 years to build with English labor. Masons arrived from Normandy, bringing their stone from Caen in France. This Caen. After William's reign, Henry III came in, followed by Edward I, and they really expanded the castle's surroundings. They added a huge curtained defensive wall and a series of smaller towers, which just totally expanded the area and made it even more scarier for all of those around them. It really became a defensive point in London for England. As the most secure castle in all the land, people started bringing royal possessions to be kept in this really secure place, and even hid the royal family here in times of war or rebellion, which happened a lot more back then. We seem to be pretty peaceful now. That being said, it wasn't just a military base. It was a surprisingly luxurious palace, and for more than 500 years, monarchs were building upon that with their art and their stories. For all of history, since the beginning of the tower, it's been seen as a place of awe and fear. Kings and queens imprisoned their rivals within these walls. Some of them never left. Stories of prisoners, rich and poor, still haunt this tower. It serves as a protector of the crown jewels, as well as a home for the yeoman warders, which you might recognize as a beefeater, and its legendary guardians, the pampered ravens. It's a family of approximately 6 ravens that have lived here for a long, long time, and they continue to come back. They're very well taken care of, but it's a mystery as to where they came from and why they're there. The tower attracts more than 3 million visitors each year that just want to see exactly what the tower is about. So I mentioned the beefeaters, the yeoman warders. They're a very recognized symbol all over the tower. They've been there for centuries. Not like the same, they changed the guard. They were part of the yeomen of the guard, but then they started to become the monarch's personal guard, starting with King Henry VIII. And he decreed that they would stay with him and guard the tower permanently. So that's why they're such a fixture of the tower. Henry VIII's first personal guards were known as the beefeaters, so that's where that word comes from, although it is my 3rd favorite gin. And they were named this because they were permitted to eat as much beef as they wanted to. And this meat came from the king's table itself, which was a great honor at the time. And there are many other traditions, such as those that live on, and they have been since the starting of the tower, as do the ghost stories that keep coming back. There are terrible tales of torture and public executions, which, might I add, happened on the grounds, and people's remains, mostly their severed heads, but sometimes their bodies, were actually paraded through the streets of London as a sort of warning not to disobey the royal family, a warning to stay in line. The British were actually really good at that back in the day. The tower has a luxurious history and is home to lots of different attractions, such as the Royal Armoury, the Royal Mint, and a zoo, also known as a menagerie. But don't be fooled. The Tower of London stands to be one of the most haunted buildings in all of England. And this is perhaps because of how many individuals are inhabiting from the other side. So royal life and death in the castle. Medieval kings and queens lived a very luxurious life, as I stated. They had beautiful apartments adorning these towers. They worshipped at the Chapel Royal, and they kept a menagerie of exotic animals, which lasted up until about the 19th century. The Duke of Wellington moved all of the animals to the London Zoo in 1932. But troubled spirits of the former beasts never truly left, and they stick around, and they let themselves be known. Many have claimed to see a spectral bear charging them, and that's why these guards were so terrified, because they allegedly saw it, and other people have seen it since. One of the sentries at the Martin Tower was alarmed by a figure like a huge bear emerging from under the door. He thrust at it with his bayonet, which struck the door. He dropped it in a fit and was carried senseless to the guard's room. All of this I avouch nothing more than I saw the poor man in the guardhouse prostrated with terror, and in that 2 or 3 days, the result fatal. He died. A guy died from fright by seeing a ghost bear in this tower, and this isn't the first time that people have seen a ghost bear, and nor do I think it will be the last. But this chilling tale has been retold for many years. Some say it's the devil in disguise, trying to pull you into the underworld with him, and I guess it does work, because he died of fright, or a heart attack, or whatever he died of. This was a place where there was magnificent ceremonies, and this was where you would welcome foreign officials that would come. Now let's talk about Anne Boleyn, because she's probably one of the most famous characters that have passed away in the walls of the castle. So if you don't know who Anne Boleyn is, she was the apple of Henry VIII's eye at one point in her life. He modernized all of the rooms to prepare for her coronation in 1533. She and King Henry feasted here in splendor. But this beautiful feast and this celebration was very short-lived, because in just 3 years, Anne was brought to the Tower accused of adultery and treason. She was held in these luxurious lodgings before her trial and execution. She was executed by sword at the Tower Green. Her decapitated body was buried under the floor of St. Peter's Chapel. Though I will say later in 1876, Queen Victoria did have her exhumed and had her body moved to be buried more appropriately, because she really didn't deserve that. Now, it's said that Anne Boleyn's headless body has been sighted kind of traversing the Tower Green and the grounds therein. People have seen Anne Boleyn's headless body, or she's kind of cradling her head and walking around. Specifically, they say that her headless torso sort of paces and kind of sticks around the St. Peter Chapel as well. Now, this story comes from 1864. There were guards that would guard the premises. They would walk around at nighttime, and this one time a guard actually wrote in the work journal how scared he was. It's recorded that he saw terrifyingly a headless Anne walking around. She was sort of pacing the grounds, and he didn't know what to do. He panicked, actually walking up to the figure and stabbed it with his bayonet. But of course, the dagger went directly through her. It was at this point that the soldier actually fainted and was about to be court-martialed for falling asleep on the job. But so many guards came forward at that point and claimed that they had also seen Anne Boleyn's body. So whether this was actually him seeing her ghost or just saying, hey guys, I'm about to be court-martialed, possibly executed, can you come and also say that you saw Anne Boleyn's body? Who's to say that that didn't happen? But maybe he did actually see Anne Boleyn's body and fainted of fright. Although a short while later, one of the captains of the guard was doing his patrol, and he noticed flickering lights coming from the chapel. He said he climbed to the windows and he pressed his face against the glass to see inside, to see if maybe he could catch someone in the act of flickering the lights. He saw lords, ladies, and knights in armor inside of the chapel in some sort of procession. And at the center of this festivity was a small, delicately dressed woman. He later identified her as Anne Boleyn. So he stayed there for a couple of minutes, transfixed on what he was seeing. And that's when the chapel lights faded and the procession was no more. After that, it was just a dark, empty, old church. The next lady of the Tower of London is Lady Arabella Stuart. Now, she was an English noblewoman who was considered to be the next possible in line to the throne, a successor to Queen Elizabeth I of England. And it was during the reign of King James VI that Lady Arabella Stuart married William Seymour in secret, which totally went against what King James would have wanted for her. And this was a big no-no. So she and her husband tried to escape England. It's thought that they were going to Calais in France. Their ships were stopped and they were taken prisoner. Lady Arabella was imprisoned at the Tower of London, never seeing her husband again, dying at the age of 39 after she refused to eat and contracted an illness. Or at least that's what the story says. She was buried at Westminster Abbey. She has also been known to walk around the Tower Green and is quite sad, probably because she misses her husband. I guess they married for love. Yay. So the White Tower is home to, wouldn't you guess it, a lady in white. Yep, another lady in white ghost. She stalks the tower. That's the word that the historian says. She stalks the tower. You can actually smell her perfume from time to time and see her kind of float along with her beautiful white dress. Of course, they always have a white dress. And she's followed by a chill in the air. My kind of girl. So there's one story that cannot be fully corroborated, so I'm gonna surmise some details, and maybe this is correct, maybe it's not. But in 1463, two princes were allegedly infamously murdered by their uncle King Richard, who at the time was the Duke of Gloucester. This happened in the tower, and then their bodies were buried within the tower. There is another thought or theory going around that perhaps they got ill, there was an illness going around at the time, and that King Richard was keeping them safe, and then they passed away at the time, and then they didn't want to bring this forward, they didn't want anyone to know, so they simply just buried the bodies and didn't tell anybody. That's how you get a ghost though. So they were the son of King Edward IV and his wife Elizabeth Woodville, but they would have outlived their father who died. They say that Richard killed them as a way to secure his line to the throne because their father would have been king, and so he was killing them to take the succession for himself, although that's pretty bad. And he didn't even do it himself, he had other people do it and hide the body. Now, the illness thing kind of doesn't work for me. The murder kind of more makes sense because in 1674, workmen at the tower were undergoing some renovations and they uncovered the bodies of two young boys, now they were just bones at this point, underneath a staircase within a wooden box, and they were unadorned, but they were nicely dressed. They were approximately the ages that the boys would have been, around 12 and around 9. This has never been proved certain, but they've been since reburied elsewhere. It's said that people see the boys together. Usually they are darker spirits, they're holding hands, and they're kind of around that tower where they would have been imprisoned prior to their murder, or where they would have been taken care of if they were sick. People do see them walking around, usually hand in hand, and they look similar to what they assumed King Edward's children would have looked like. So if they were murdered, they're definitely not resting in peace. One of the most infamous entryways into the Tower of London is Traitor's Gate. Now, most prisoners would have walked through Traitor's Gate, and they would adorn it with body parts at the time to kind of freak them out more. But anyone who was a prisoner would have gone through these gates, hence why they're called Traitor's Gate. Many did not make it out alive. There was a cacophony of ways that you could be killed back in this time, but it's said that a lot of people kind of hang around Traitor's Gate because it would have been the last thing they saw before their execution or torture, and often they were tortured for crimes they didn't commit. They just confessed to stop the torture, and so maybe a lot of these people were innocent that died. Maybe they were just poor. Some visitors walking around the castle grounds feel like the walls are closing in on them, and they'll gasp for breath, or something worse, they will panic, and no one really knows why. It's enough to run a chill down your spine, which does happen to a lot of these people. There's an increasing feeling of someone tapping on your shoulder. A lot of people explain the fright that they get. Now, this is something I've never heard of before. There is actually haunted armor. Yeah, there's haunted armor in this castle. It belonged to King Henry VIII. Patrolling the grounds often brings a lot of spine-chilling feelings to those men and women that are still serving there today. Some guards have told some really harrowing experiences. Some describe the feeling of walking into a room and feeling like you're being crushed alive, almost as if you're being tortured. They think it's a demonic presence. But this all is related to one specific item, King Henry's armor. Yeah, haunted armor, that's a first for me. But they say there are so many tales of guards being assaulted by this invisible cloak. And even in one case, a guard came screaming into the room that there was an invisible assailant trying to murder him, and there were actually finger marks on his throat. Like literally hands gripping around your neck, taking your oxygen away. Is there such a thing as murderous king's armor? That it feels like an invisible monster coming to strangle you. Peasants and prisoners were not the only ones to die in this castle. King Henry VI actually met his end here, and it was horrible. It was like a real-life Game of Thrones. Like, real. He was the only child of King Henry V. So he stood to inherit actually the English and the French throne because of his birth. But his life was plagued with skirmishes up until 1471. As the War of the Roses waged across England, King Henry was imprisoned at the House of York, the Tower of London. You see where this is going? So they say that initially he died of broken-hearted illness in this tower during his imprisonment, but it's really hard to say that he wasn't just stabbed to death, because his ghost shows up in all of his grisly glory to tell you the story of his death, and he's been seen multiple times, really stabby looking. Richard of York's son, Edward, God, this family is murderous, seized control after the Battle of Tewkesbury, and he straight up called for his assassination, where he was then murdered while kneeling to pray. Margaret de la Pole, probably one of the most gruesome botched executions in all of history. This poor woman. She was the Countess of Salisbury, obviously married in because she had a French-ass name. She became imprisoned in the Tower and was considered an enemy of the state after her son, a cardinal, denounced King Henry VIII as the head of the church. Whoops. So, her son, who was a cardinal, was in France at the time, and instead of going and having him brought over, because that would have been ridiculous, King Henry just took it out on Margaret. It's said that when she made it to the scaffold where she was about to be executed, she refused to kneel. "So should traitors do. I am none," she said. Badass. As she was of noble birth, there was about 150 people there to watch, and as the executioner raised his axe to end her, she ran away, and he ended up chasing her, hacking her to death along the way as she ran around the scaffold. It's said that she still will come back and do a bloody reenactment of her last minutes of being hacked to death by an executioner chasing her through the scaffolding that was meant to be her execution stage. Poor girl. Sorry, Margaret. Lady Jane Grey and her husband Guilford Dudley. So they died in 1554. They say that she was the rightful heir to the throne even as her death warrant was being signed. She was the great-granddaughter of King Henry VII. And there was a small group of men that tried to make Jane the queen, which would have really changed history. But King Henry VIII's daughter, Mary I, put an end to that real fast. As soon as she married King Philip of Spain, she sentenced Lady Jane and her husband to death. Now, Lady Jane Grey was only 16 years old at the time of her execution. That's not a lot. And numerous male members of her family were executed at the same time, just for good measure. So while she was still alive, her husband's remains were brought into the room and given to her while she was still sitting there waiting for her execution, which is just awful. That's tormenting for a 16-year-old to see. The last time Jane was really spotted as a ghost was in 1957. People saw her actually near where the scaffolding was. And people also say that her husband's ghost, Mr. Dudley, he will carve her name into like random objects around the castle. So if you see Jane carved, know that Dudley was there. The governor of the tower, which lived in the same suite that Lady Arabella lived in, actually reported sometime between 1994 and 2006 a disturbing event where his wife was violently pushed by some unseen force and propelled forward out of her room and into the hallway. Other reports seeing Lady Arabella heartbroken and weeping hysterically on the tower grounds. In 2003, during 3 consecutive winter nights, staff were called to close a fire door. On the first day, CCTV footage captured the doors being flung open for seemingly no reason. Then the second day, the doors were flung open again, only this time, footage also captured a robed figure suddenly appearing to close the doors. The doors were again flung open on the third day, but there was no one to be seen to close them. People believe that this might be a former priest that lived in the chapel, but no one knows why he specifically decided to fling the doors open at this time, and it caught Londoners off guard. Final fact, the Tower of London is still used today as a place of imprisonment. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and is considered to have consecrated grounds. There's still a military base and there's an armory still there today. Would you want to be imprisoned here if you did something wrong? Because I don't think you would be alone if you would. So what are your thoughts? The Tower of London, is it truly haunted? Is Anne Boleyn walking around headless? Are the little boys hand in hand, hoping for you to solve their mystery? You be the judge. I'd love to know your thoughts. Please put them in the comment section down below. Also be sure to like this video and if you liked it. And if you're not already, please subscribe. I look forward to seeing you on TikTok, and I'll catch you in the next video. Happy September, everybody.